I can still hear my cousin Raymond's voice like a bullet to the chest. She doesn't have anything. What's she even doing here? She's just poor. Everyone went silent. Not because they disagreed, but because they agreed. Silently, willingly. I sat at the polished mahogany table in Aunt Lillian's mansion, surrounded by blood relatives who now looked at me like I was the mold growing on the edge of their carefully crafted lives. I swallowed the heat rising in my throat, kept my lips closed tight, and reached into my folder. That moment, the one where I laid the real estate contract on the table, was the moment everything changed. But before I tell you how their smirks vanished, how the room went from smug to silent, and how Aunt Lillian's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she read the name on that paper, you need to know who I was before all this. Because no one is born a disappointment. You become one in the eyes of those who expect you to grovel. My name is Melissa Grant. I'm 33 years old, a freelance writer, and apparently, the designated failure in the Grant family. I wasn't always poor, not in spirit, and definitely not in mind. But after Mom died and Dad remarried, I slipped into the background like a shadow no one missed. My stepmother, Denise, made sure of that. She called me the charity case whenever she thought I wasn't listening. I always was. The Grants weren't just well off. They were generationally wealthy. Old money, steeped in inherited assets, real estate holdings, and smug entitlement. My father, Russell Grant, owns 2 hotels and a chain of vineyards. My half-siblings Leah and Darren drive Teslas like they're Toyotas. And me? I rented a studio the size of Aunt Lillian's walk-in closet and wrote blog posts to survive. There were whispers about my wasted potential, especially after I dropped out of law school. She had promise. Aunt Lillian once told my father at Christmas dinner, not realizing I was behind her, holding a plate of stuffing. But she got lazy. My father didn't defend me. He never does. You might ask why I still went to family events, why I put myself through that humiliation. The truth? Hope. I still hoped someone would see Mena just as a failure, not as poor Melissa but as someone worth loving. I thought maybe my grandmother, Eleanor, the quiet matriarch, saw me. She'd send handwritten cards on my birthday, always with a pressed violet inside. She used to say I reminded her of herself when she was young, strong, too sensitive, too stubborn. She died last year. That's when the real storm began. The family meeting was called 6 months after Grandma Eleanor's funeral. The invitation came as a formal letter, typed and signed by Uncle Gregory. In light of estate matters, your presence is required. It felt more like a summons. I hadn't seen my relatives since the funeral. I almost didn't go. But something in me, maybe it was grief, maybe it was defiance, pushed me to show up. It wasn't hope this time. It was something colder, sharper. I needed to know just how far they would go to erase me. The setting was classic Grant. Aunt Lillian's villa in Napa Valley, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows, imported stone floors, and that sterile scent of lemon polish and old secrets. Everyone looked like they belonged on the cover of Town and Country, tailored linen suits, pearls, smirks. As I walked in, I heard Leah whisper to Darren, "Why is she even here? She's not getting anything." I wanted to turn around. I wanted to run. But I stayed. Because there was something I hadn't told them. A contract signed in black ink. A gift I didn't expect, a clause no one saw coming. And by the time I put that paper on the table, their world, the one where I was always beneath them, began to crack. If you've ever been underestimated by the people who are supposed to love you, or been told you're less than, by your own blood, you'll understand why I'm telling this story. And if you've ever sat at a family table feeling like a ghost, wait until you hear what I did next. Would you have stayed? Would you have fought? Because I did. And it changed everything. The meeting began just after noon. Aunt Lillian, the self-appointed hostess and queen of all things grand and theatrical, tapped her crystal wine glass with a butter knife and stood up. Before we begin, I'd like to thank everyone for being here, especially those who made the trip from out of state, she said. Her gaze brushing over Darren and Leah before skipping right past me like I was part of the drapery. We're here to honor Eleanor's wishes and ensure her legacy is handled with care and dignity. Her voice had the sickly sweetness of store-bought icing too polished to be sincere. We sat around an oval table in her sunroom, sunlight spilling across everyone's glowing faces like a spotlight meant for those who belonged. I sat in the far corner, beside the potted ficus and behind a floral centerpiece that blocked my view of half the room. My father didn't speak to me when I walked in. Not even a nod. Uncle Gregory, gray-haired and stern in his double-breasted blazer, stood next. He held a legal envelope like it contained national secrets. As executor of Eleanor Grant's estate, he said, clearing his throat, I've reviewed her final will and testament, revised 3 months before her passing. I'll read the key points aloud for transparency. He opened the envelope and began listing assets like he was reading a grocery list. The San Francisco townhouse bequeathed to Aunt Lillian. The lakefront cabin in Oregon left to Darren and Leah jointly. Jewelry, art collections, vintage winesall assigned neatly to cousins, aunts, uncles. I sat silently as each name was spoken like a roll call of the worthy. My hands were ice, no one looked at me. And finally, Uncle Gregory said, pausing, the Sonoma property, Eleanor's personal residence and vineyard, will be transferred to the beneficiary listed in Appendix D. He looked confused for a moment. I wasn't aware she made changes to this, he murmured. Aunt Lillian leaned in. It's going to Russell or me, obviously. She said so a year ago. No, Uncle Gregory said, thumbing through the pages. The Sonoma estate is being granted, in full, to Melissa Grant. The silence hit like thunder. What? Leah half-laughed. That must be a typo, Aunt Lillian snapped. Melissa? Eleanor would never give her the vineyard. But Uncle Gregory was already unfolding a notarized addendum with my name, Idaho number, and a clearly signed date. This is legally binding. The room shifted. She doesn't even live here, Raymond sneered. What's Melissa going to do with a vineyard? Write a blog post about grapes? I felt the flush rise in my cheeks. I opened my mouth to speak, but my father cut in first. This doesn't make sense, Dad said coldly. Mom never mentioned this to me. No, of course not, Aunt Lillian said with a bitter smile. She probably pitied her. Left it to her out of guilt. Darren, arms crossed, said, wait. So Melissa gets a fully owned property with a working vineyard and house? That's worth millions. And we get a damn cabin? I couldn't breathe. Then Leah spoke the words that stuck like thorns. She doesn't even have a job. She's basically poor. This is ridiculous. There it was. A public shaming. A verdict. As if my bank account was the sum of my worth. As if my whole life had boiled down to a punchline for cousins in Kashmir. I felt everything inside me coil years of quiet pain, overlooked birthdays, being the afterthought in every family plan. And yet, I stayed still. Then I spoke, soft but clear. I have the original contract Grandma Eleanor had me co-sign. She told me it was the only way to protect it from being sold off. I reached into my folder, pulled out the document she made me sign 6 months ago before the cancer took her voice. I placed it in the center of the table, face up. Nobody moved. Uncle Gregory picked it up, read it silently. This verifies the transfer. It's official, he confirmed. Raymond scoffed. So what? She has land. That doesn't make her less of a loser. Leah laughed again, the sound bitter as a cracked bell. I stood. I may be poor to you, I said, voice shaking, but Grandma didn't think so. She saw something in me that none of you ever did. Maybe I didn't inherit money, but I inherited her trust. Aunt Lillian hissed. She was dying. You manipulated her. My voice rose without my permission. Number. You just never listened to her while she was alive. The table fell into stunned silence. And for the first time, I looked each of them in the eye. Because now, they were the ones on the outside of the inheritance. And I, Melissa, the overlooked, the dismissed, was finally seen. The vineyard deed changed everything. But not in the way I imagined. I thought maybe, just maybe, it would be a moment of recognition. that the truth of Grandma's choice would force them to see me differently. But instead, the silence that followed that meeting carved deeper than any words ever had. They left me out of everything. No follow-up calls. No emails. No group texts about what to do with the rest of Grandma's belongings. Even when the family chat buzzed with pictures from a weekend honoring Eleanor at the lake house, my lake house now, they never included me. They all went. Darren, Leah, Aunt Lillian, even my dad. But not me. I watched the pictures roll in from my phone screen while sitting alone on the couch in my studio apartment, a mug of reheated coffee in hand. They smiled with fake tears, holding champagne flutes, toasting her spirit. I stared at the screen, heart pounding, thumb hovering over the group chat. I typed, "Thanks for the invite. Next time just send a formal disownment." Then deleted it. I said nothing. Instead, I buried myself in cleaning, organizing. I scrubbed the floor tiles until my knees hurt and washed dishes I hadn't even used. I told myself it didn't matter, that they were petty, that I didn't need them. But the truth was I did. Or, at least, I wanted to. The kind of want that presses into your chest like a weight you can't quite exhale. Later that week, I drove up to the Vineyard house for the first time. Alone. The property was breathtaking, rolling hills, the late summer vines heavy with fruit, the cottage nestled under the wide oak trees that bordered the lot. I stood there with the keys Eleanor had mailed to me months ago, just after she made me co-sign the transfer, before the will was even revised. I remember that day so vividly. She was weak, barely walking on her own, but she insisted on showing me the back fence and the tiny bench she'd sit on during harvest. Her voice rasped, but she said, "This place is going to be yours, honey. And I need you to promise me one thing." "Anything," I whispered. "Don't sell it. Not unless your soul tells you to. They'll come for it." But I wanted to go to someone who listens, not someone who's just waiting to cash it in. That was the last day she ever stood outside. Back at the house, I walked through each room slowly, touching the wood beams, breathing in the faint scent of dried lavender that always lingered in her linen. Her photos still hung on the wall. Our photo from when I was 9, hugging her waist at the fall fair, was still in a frame by the kitchen. She didn't forget me, she chose me. But my family made sure I still felt like the outsider. A week later, I ran into Dad at a grocery store in Mill Valley. He was shopping with Denise, his wife, the one who always looked at me like I was a bad smell she couldn't quite place. "Oh, Melissa," Dad said, blinking like he'd seen a ghost. "Hey," I offered, "didn't expect to see you here." He cleared his throat. "We've been meaning to call. Just a lot going on." I glanced at his cart, organic cheeses, imported olives, wine from the vineyard he now technically didn't own. "Yeah." I noticed I missed a whole Memorial weekend. Denise jumped in, her voice sharp. "That wasn't intentional. It was a last-minute thing. Plus, it's a family matter." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not family?" Dad interjected. "You know that's not what she meant." "No," I said quietly. "I think it is." He sighed. "Look, Mel, this whole will situation blindsided everyone. People are emotional. Just give them time." "Time to what? Punish me for being remembered?" My voice cracked before I could stop it. "For not staying in my place?" He didn't answer. Denise said, "You've always made things complicated." I stared at them. At the man who used to braid my hair before school. At the woman who pretended I didn't exist at dinners. And I realized I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. I walked out without buying anything. And as I sat in my car, fists clenched around the steering wheel, tears stinging my eyes, I promised myself something. They could exclude me from the parties, the photos, the fake smiles. But I wasn't going to be ashamed of being chosen. The weeks that followed were colder than the grave we'd buried Grandma in. They started trying to chip away at me from every angle, quietly at first, like termites in a beam. Then bold, loud, ruthless. It began with a letter. A thick envelope arrived at my apartment, stamped with my father's law firm's insignia. My stomach twisted even before I opened it. Inside was a formal notice Aunt Lillian and Uncle Gregory, through their attorneys, were formally requesting reconsideration of the inheritance arrangement regarding the Sonoma property, citing concerns of undue influence and mental capacity during the signing of the revised will. They were challenging the will. I reread the line 3 times, each word pressing like a gavel on my heart. They were accusing me of taking advantage of Grandma Eleanor in her final days. The rage was hot, but the betrayal cut deeper. Aunt Lillian, who had barely visited Grandma the last year. Uncle Gregory, who hadn't picked up a call unless it was about estate taxes. And now, suddenly, they were the moral guardians of Eleanor's intentions? I called my dad. Dad, I said as soon as he picked up. Did you know about this challenge? There was silence. A hesitation I knew too well. I did, he finally admitted. Gregory mentioned it. And you didn't think to tell me? It's complicated, Melissa. They're just trying to understand what happened. You have to admit it was unusual. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Unusual? She told me what she wanted. She even notarized the transfer. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. But they're grieving. People say things, do things. Don't, I snapped. Don't pretend this is grief. This is greed. He sighed like he was the victim. Just let the lawyers sort it out. That night, I cried in the bathtub with the water running so the neighbors wouldn't hear. The next injustice came in the form of a social ambush. Leah and Darren threw a wine appreciation event at the Vineyard My Vineyard. They invited a bunch of their friends from Napa and the Bay Area and marketed it as a Grant family legacy night. I found out from Instagram. Photos of my homie land filled the screen, wine bottles bearing the vineyard's name, Eleanor Estate, being poured by strangers. My grandmother's name. My name, erased. I called Darren. Hey, Melissa, he answered, casual like we were just catching up. What the hell are you doing on my property? He laughed. It's just a tasting, chill. You weren't using it. I never gave permission. That's trespassing. Gregory said you wouldn't care. It's for exposure. Exposure for what? You don't own it. Technically, he said smugly, that's up for debate. Click. The next day, I filed a formal cease and desist through a lawyer friend who owed me a favor. But they didn't stop. They began circulating rumors within the family at dinners, fundraisers, holiday parties. Whispers that I'd pressured Grandma while she was doped up on pain meds, that I forged documents. That I was unstable, depressed, financially desperate. One night, I got a message from my cousin, Maya, one of the few who still spoke to me. Maya. Just a heads up, Lillian told people you were mentally unfit to manage the property. She's trying to claim you can't make sound decisions, says you're emotional and erratic. May, of course she did. Maya. I don't believe it. Just protect yourself. They wanted to break me down. Gaslight me into thinking I wasn't capable. Into thinking maybe I was the unstable one. But I remembered Eleanor's voice in my head. You're not soft, you're tender. That's not the same thing. Still, the pressure mounted. I received notice of a scheduled mediation hearing. Aunt Lillian and Uncle Gregory were pushing for a forced buyout, claiming family harmony would be best served if the estate was divided more equally. They wanted me to sign over my rights. They offered me $300,000. The vineyard was worth over $2 million. It wasn't just disrespect, it was war. And they wanted me to surrender quietly like I always had. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I didn't sleep the night after the mediation notice arrived. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every inch of me buzzing with dread and disbelief. They wanted me to surrender the vineyard. Just like that. Take the money, disappear, stay in my place. But something in me, something buried under years of silence, finally pushed back. I wasn't just holding on to a piece of land, I was holding on to my worth. The next morning, I brewed the strongest coffee I had, sat at the tiny kitchen table in my studio, and opened my laptop. If they wanted to test me, they were going to meet someone they didn't know existed. I started with the contract. I scanned and uploaded every page, then emailed it to 3 different legal contacts. One was a friend from undergrad who now worked at a boutique estate law firm. The second, a mentor from the writing program I'd once attended. She had a brother who specialized in family disputes. The third was a long shot, a lawyer I followed online who wrote fierce essays about inheritance battles and systemic family gaslighting. I wrote a single line to him. "They think I'll give up because I'm quiet. Can you help me prove them wrong?" By noon, I had 2 responses. One said I had a solid legal standing. The other offered to meet via Zoom that week. For the first time in days, I felt a current of power return to my spine. I also decided to start living at the vineyard part-time. If they were going to challenge my ownership, I needed to claim it fully. I packed up my car with essentials and drove north, blasting music the whole way to drown out the self-doubt gnawing at my chest. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, I sat for a long time just staring at the house. The vines shimmered in the early evening light. It didn't feel like wealth, it felt like peace, it felt like grandma. The cottage was dusty but intact. I spent 2 days cleaning, unpacking, and creating a tiny home office in what used to be Eleanor's sunroom. I found her old leather-bound planner tucked between books on viticulture. Inside, pressed against the September page, was another violet. She'd left it for me. Maybe she knew this battle would come. Maybe she'd always known the others would fight dirty. I started documenting everything. Every letter, every text, every voicemail I got from my relatives. I kept screenshots of Leah's passive-aggressive Instagram captions. "Family is everything except when it isn't." I took photos of the damage left behind after their tasting event, crushed cups, empty bottles, a trampled garden path. At the same time, I began learning, really learning, about the vineyard, the land, the process. I found Grandma's old files, harvest records, wine buyers, distribution contacts. I reached out to a retired manager she'd worked with named Pete, who agreed to walk me through the basics. "I always thought Eleanor would pass this on to someone with guts," he said during one of our meetings. "Didn't think it'd be you, but now that I see you here, maybe she was right." I smiled, tired but proud. "I'm not going anywhere." Still, there were moments when I doubted myself. Times when the loneliness felt bigger than the land. One afternoon, I got a text from my dad. "Dad, you sure this is worth it? You're making everyone uncomfortable." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. I'm not here to keep everyone comfortable. I'm here to do what Grandma wanted." He never replied. I also began documenting my journey in a private blog at first just for myself. It became my therapy. I called it Rooted, a Granddaughter's Fight. I wrote about the land, about Eleanor, about what it meant to be the black sheep given a torch and told to run. And to my surprise, people started finding it, sharing it, commenting with stories of their own battles, their own betrayals. One message read, "Thank you. I thought I was alone in this." Another, "Don't let them erase you, you belong." Each word felt like armor. With every day that passed, I became more rooted literally and figuratively. I was no longer Melissa who needs a break. I was Melissa who was chosen. And I was done begging for recognition. I was claiming it. And they were just getting started. The mediation hearing was set for a Tuesday afternoon in early October. It wasn't in a courtroom, it was in one of those neutral office spaces with pale carpet and sterile paintings meant to look like calm ocean waves. But it felt more like a battlefield. I arrived early, wearing the only tailored blazer I owned, hairpinned, heart racing. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Teresa Liu, met me at the door and gave me a small, encouraging nod. "They're going to be emotional," she warned gently. "Don't match their heat, let the truth speak." When I stepped into the conference room, the air was already thick. Aunt Lillian sat on one side of the long glass table, lips tight, pearls resting perfectly at her throat. Uncle Gregory was beside her, flipping through documents like he was auditioning for a legal drama. My father sat at the end, avoiding my gaze. Leah and Darren were there too, arms crossed, smug and unreadable. I sat across from them, every nerve in my body humming. The mediator, a calm middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair named Mr. Vernon, opened with pleasantries. Then he got to it. We're here today to address the dispute over the transfer of the Sonoma Vineyard property, currently held by Miss Melissa Grant, and contested by members of the Grant family. Aunt Lillian wasted no time. Melissa has never had any role in managing family assets. She doesn't understand business, she's struggling financially. It is in the estate's best interest and Eleanor's true intent that the property remain with those who can preserve it. My hands clenched under the table. Teresa jumped in. With respect, Miss Grant was given legal title to the vineyard through a notarized contract signed by Eleanor Grant herself. That transfer was not only clear, but premeditated. We have communication, financial records, and witness accounts to support this. Uncle Gregory leaned forward. We believe Eleanor was not in sound mind. She was heavily medicated at the time. Her decisions, particularly this one, were influenced by sentimentality and potentially by coercion. Are you accusing me of manipulating my dying grandmother? I said before Teresa could stop me. Because if you are, you better have proof. Leah smirked. You were always fragile. Grandma felt sorry for you. She didn't feel sorry, I snapped. She trusted me. Something none of you ever did. Aunt Lillian's voice went cold. We are not here to debate emotions. This is about what is fair. Fair. That word burned in my ears. Teresa calmly laid out the evidence. The signed contract, emails from Eleanor to her estate planner, letters handwritten in the final months where she mentioned her decision to leave the land to someone who loves it. There were even receipts, literal ones, from visits I'd made to help Eleanor maintain the property while no one else came. When Teresa mentioned the unauthorized wine event Darren and Leah hosted on the vineyard, complete with social media photos and guest lists, the mediator raised an eyebrow. You conducted a public event on land you do not own. It was for the family, Darren said stiffly. You didn't invite the legal owner, Teresa countered. Or get her permission. The room shifted. My father finally spoke. Melissa, he said, not looking at me. Maybe there's a middle ground here. Sell the property. Let the family buy you out. You'll come out ahead, and this tension can end. It took everything in me not to scream. You mean you want it? I said quietly. You all just assumed I'd give it up because I don't drive a Lexus and I rent my apartment. But Grandma saw me. Not for what I had but who I was. Don't romanticize this, Aunt Lillian hissed. You're being selfish. No, I said. You're just not used to hearing no. Mr. Vernon interjected. Given the legitimacy of the documents and the absence of any concrete evidence of coercion, it is this mediator's recommendation that the current ownership remain as is. Unless further legal challenges are filed in court, this mediation concludes the matter. Aunt Lillian looked like she'd swallowed glass. Uncle Gregory packed his files without a word. Leah stood abruptly, muttering. This isn't over. They stormed out one by one, their silence louder than their shouting had ever been. My father lingered. I waited for him to say anything. But he just nodded, as if this was a negotiation I'd won, not a family I was fighting to remain part of. When the door finally closed, Teresa turned to me. You were incredible. I didn't feel incredible. I felt broken and furious and proud all at once. But as we walked to the elevator, I remembered something Grandma once told me when I was a teenager crying about a school presentation gone wrong. Winning the mediation should have felt like victory. It didn't. It felt like standing alone on scorched earth, the smoke still rising, and everyone else walking away without looking back. After that hearing, no one in the family spoke to me. Not even Maya, who had been the only cousin to reach out before. I checked my phone more than I wanted to admit, but the silence just echoed. No calls, no texts, just nothing. Like I didn't exist. They didn't even wait a week before planning a holiday party at a Napa winery not far from the vineyard. Pictures surfaced, of course. The whole Grant clan lined up for a toast, even smiling under a banner that said, "Family is everything." It was almost comical. I spent Christmas Eve alone. The vineyard house was quiet, eerily so. No lights, no carols, no scent of cinnamon cookies like the ones Grandma used to make. I lit a single candle and sat by the fireplace, a glass of red in my hand, and the kind of ache in my chest that doesn't leave room for appetite. Earlier that day, I'd found an old voicemail from Grandma Eleanor accidentally saved in a random folder. Her voice was thin but warm. "Sweet girl, I hope you're writing today. You always sound more alive when you're writing. The land will wait. Take your time with it. Just don't take your light for granted." I listened to it 3 times, then buried my face in a blanket and wept like a child. It was the only voice that had ever called me light. On New Year's Eve, I didn't even pretend. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to see their curated happiness. Instead, I tried walking the vineyard path at midnight, thinking maybe fresh air would help. But it was too cold. The vines were bare. Everything looked dead, and for a moment I felt like I had become a ghost in my own life. I stood under the moonlight and whispered to no one. "Why did you leave me with this? Grandma, why give me a war I have to fight alone?" The worst part wasn't the legal stress or the rumors or even the loneliness. It was the creeping thought that maybe they were right. That maybe I was the one clinging too tightly to something I couldn't manage. That maybe I had peaked in college. That maybe they saw something in me that I didn't want to admit. I stopped blogging. Stopped answering emails. For weeks, I couldn't write a single word. I started sleeping in late, letting dishes pile up, avoiding mirrors. Every day blurred into the next, quiet and heavy. I stopped checking the mail. I didn't want to see another envelope with a return address from someone who wanted to take something else from me. Then one day, the rain came hard unexpected and sharp. A leak started in the roof of the vineyard house, right in the guest bedroom. I stood there for a full minute, watching the water drip steadily onto the old rug, and I broke. Not in anger, not in tears, but in numb, paralyzing stillness. I sat down beside the puddle and just stayed there. For hours. As if the water leaking from the ceiling could fill the emptiness I felt inside. That was my bottom. That cold floor, that wet rug, that silence. I remember whispering out loud, "If this is where I end up, at least let me disappear quietly. I'll Lou." But the storm didn't swallow me. The house didn't collapse, and somewhere in the middle of that long, wet night, something small stirred inside me, no hope exactly, but defiance. A tiny ember. A whisper of Eleanor's voice saying, "The land will wait." The next morning, I picked up the phone and called Pete, the old vineyard manager. I asked him how to repair a leak. Then I asked him if he'd consider coming back part-time just to walk me through the early spring prep. "You sure you're ready?" he asked. "No," I said honestly. "But I don't want to give up yet." There was a pause. "Then I'll see you Monday." Pete showed up Monday morning with a thermos of black coffee and an old canvas binder under his arm. "This," he said, tapping the binder, "is every record Eleanor kept on the vineyard from 1992 to the year before she passed. Notes, receipts, even correspondence." She was obsessive about details. I hadn't known this collection existed. I took it from him like it was sacred. We sat at the kitchen table as the morning fog lifted from the fields. He opened to a page marked with a red ribbon. "This is from 2 years ago. You see that?" He pointed to a handwritten note on a post-it stuck inside the ledger. "If they ever come for it, give this to Melissa. She'll know what to do." The post-it had my name. My full name, in Grandma's rounded cursive. Beneath it was a list of names: Lillian, Gregory, Russell, next to numbers and bank references. Pete leaned in. I think she knew they'd challenge it. "But this? This looks like leverage. Financial records, transfers. Things she never confronted them about, probably to keep the family together." I stared at the list. Aunt Lillian had received $85,000 in consulting fees through the vineyard account. Uncle Gregory had redirected supply orders to his own company. Even my father had used the estate as a silent backer for one of his investments. Grandma had documented it all quietly. She never confronted them. But she kept receipts. Literal ones. I spent the rest of the day going through the binder. Letters, emails, dated observations, even a few voice recordings on an old cassette tucked in the back. I couldn't believe it. She had recorded a few of her conversations with my dad and Lillian about the vineyard's future. One clip stood out. Grandma's voice, firm but calm. "If I leave it to you, you'll sell it in a heartbeat. Melissa at least listens. She has heart. She doesn't just see dollar signs." That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, drafting an email with the subject line, "Records regarding Eleanor Grant Vineyard Estate for your review." I sent it to every party who'd sat across from me in that mediation room: Lillian, Gregory, my father, even Darren and Leah. I attached scanned images of the ledger, selected audio clips, and one PDF titled "Unauthorized Transactions Compiled Evidence." Then I wrote the body of the email, short and clear. "I suggest we stop pretending this is about concern or fairness. I now understand what Grandma meant when she said, 'Don't sell unless your soul tells you to.' You all saw the vineyard as property. She saw it as a legacy. I'm not letting that legacy be turned into hush money. This is your chance to walk away quietly. No courts, no media. But if you choose to keep pressing, I will make all of this public. Every document, every cent, every word. And I won't back down again." The next morning, my phone exploded. Calls, texts, voicemails, I ignored them all. Later that afternoon, my father showed up, not in a car. Not with Denise. He walked up the gravel path in jeans and a rain jacket, his face pale. I met him at the porch. "Can we talk?" he asked. I crossed my arms. "Depends. Are you here as my father or as a man trying to protect his assets?" He flinched. "As your father. And as someone who made a lot of mistakes." I didn't answer, so he continued. "I didn't know she kept all that. She never said anything." "Of course she didn't," I said, heat rising. "She knew you'd twist it. I wasn't trying to screw you over, Melissa. I just didn't believe she'd actually leave it to you." There it was. The truth. Ugly, simple. Because I wasn't enough, right? Not successful. Not strategic. Just the kid you forgot to text back half the time. His voice cracked. "Because I didn't think you'd fight. I thought you'd fold like always, and when you didn't, I panicked." I stared at him. This man who used to tuck me in with stories when I was little. This man who had watched me be treated like a second-class citizen at every family gathering and never once intervened. "I'm not folding," I said. "Not ever again." I said. He nodded slowly. "I believe that now." After he left, I started getting emails. Leah and Darren first snide, defensive. Then Gregory more formal, legal, but clearly shaken. And finally, Lillian. Hers was a single line. "We never thought you'd be this clever. She taught you well. Don't expect another apology." I didn't need one. I had the truth. And I had leverage. But more than that, I had the strength I thought I'd lost during those long weeks alone. It turned out, the deeper you dig into your own despair, the closer you get to your backbone. I contacted Teresa. We reviewed the documents together and began preparing for any legal pushback. But nothing came. No lawsuits, no follow-up mediation requests, just silence. And silence was victory. Still, I wasn't satisfied with private wins anymore. I reactivated my blog. I began writing again, sharing everything. The manipulation, the erasure, the documents. I wrote without shame, without softening the truth to make anyone comfortable. The post went viral. Dozens of messages came in from strangers. Inheritance disputes, power grabs, families ripping each other apart under the guise of what's fair. My story wasn't rare, it was just rarely told. A week later, I got an offer from a podcast producer. Then a small publisher emailed about expanding the blog into a memoir. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I was ready to be public. But then I thought about Eleanor's voice. You always sound more alive when you're writing. She was right. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back, loud and clear. The final confrontation wasn't planned. It happened at Grandma Eleanor's estate memorial, an event the family had quietly organized with the local historical society to unveil a commemorative plaque on the vineyard. The land had been deemed culturally significant due to Eleanor's work with local growers and her pioneering role as a female landowner in the region. I wasn't on the original guest list, but someone from the society, a kind woman named Grace who'd read my blog and reached out weeks earlier, invited me personally. You're her heir. You should be there. Everyone knows who really carried out her wishes, Grace had said over the phone. So I went. And I went prepared. I wore black slacks and a burgundy blouse, Eleanor's favorite color. I pinned one of her vintage brooches to my chest and walked into the vineyard lawn like it belonged to me, because it did. Rows of folding chairs were arranged under a tent, a long table with framed photos and a velvet cloth over the bronze plaque sat at the front. Most of the Grant family was already there. Aunt Lillian in pearls again, Darren and Leah whispering behind sunglasses, Uncle Gregory by the refreshment table. My father was there too, stiff in a blazer, eyes darting the moment he saw me. As I walked up the aisle toward the front, the entire family turned toward me like I was a virus re-entering a sanitized room. Aunt Lillian's voice cut the air. You weren't invited. No, I said evenly, but I was asked. She stood slowly, facing me, that same frozen smile she wore at the mediation now back in place. This is a public tribute, not a stage for your little grievance project. I didn't flinch. It's not a grievance, it's a legacy. And if you're going to stand here and pretend to honor Eleanor, you're not doing it without me. Leah scoffed. You're just trying to stay relevant. What, the blog wasn't enough? Now you're crashing public events. I turned to her. You stood on my property. Sold wine you didn't own. Claimed to honor Grandma while trying to erase her final wishes. So maybe don't lecture me on relevance. Grace approached, confused by the tension. Is everything okay? Yes, I said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. We're just discussing who really deserves to speak on Eleanor Grant's behalf. A murmur swept through the crowd. Uncle Gregory stepped in, hands up. Melissa, no one's denying your connection. But this isn't the time or place. Isn't it? I interrupted. This vineyard was her soul. And she left it to someone she trusted. She didn't choose the ones who siphoned money out of her account. Or the ones who only visited when cameras were involved. That turned heads. I walked over to the table and picked up one of the framed photos, Grandma and I sitting under the arbor, both laughing. I held it up. This was taken a year before she passed. She had me plant a new row of grapes that week, said it was a row for the future. You all said she was confused, senile, manipulated, but she wasn't. She was lucid, and she was deliberate. Aunt Lillian's voice cracked. She was dying. She wasn't thinking clearly. No, I said calmly. She was thinking more clearly than anyone else. That's why she documented everything. I pulled out the manila envelope I'd brought with me and placed it on the table in front of everyone. Bank statements, wire transfers, notes in her own handwriting, even recorded conversations. I turned to the attendees, the press among them. Would you like to hear Aunt Lillian refer to this land as a cash-out plan in Eleanor's final months? Or perhaps Uncle Gregory's breakdown of how to split the proceeds once it was sold? Gasps rippled through the audience. My father stepped forward. Melissa, enough. This isn't a trial. I turned to him, the rage bubbling up from a place deeper than even I expected. No, it's not. Because if it were, half of you would be pleading the fifth. Then, quieter, you let them steamroll me for years. You watched them laugh at me, exclude me, shame me for not being rich or successful. And when they came for Grandma's land, you stood by again. He didn't answer. Leah, flustered, looked to Aunt Lillian, who was now visibly pale. I stepped back and addressed the crowd. Eleanor Grant was not confused. She was not manipulated. She was betrayed by the people closest to her, and still, she made a decision based on love. She chose Menno because I was successful or polished or perfect, but because I showed up when no one else did. Because I listened. Then I lifted the velvet cloth and revealed the bronze plaque. It read, "In honor of Eleanor Grant Vintner, matriarch, visionary." She grew more than grapes. She grew resilience. The silence was thick. Even the birds quieted. I looked at Grace. "Would you mind if I said a few words for the official tribute?" She nodded with tears in her eyes. "Please do." Die. And I did. I spoke from the heart. I talked about afternoons under the trees with Grandma, about the way she taught me patience through pruning and love through labor. I told the truth. Not for revenge but for record. For history. For every person who's ever been silenced in a family for not being what others expected. When it was over, most of the crowd clapped. Not politely but earnestly. A few even hugged me. The Grant family? They left in a tight cluster, silent and defeated, eyes lowered as if escaping their own reflection. And as I stood there on the land I fought for, the weight of years finally lifted, I realized this wasn't just the end of a battle. It was the beginning of something I had never had before. Respect. On my terms. In the weeks that followed the Vineyard Memorial, the tide turned so fast it almost gave me whiplash. The blog post I wrote about the confrontation went viral again. Only this time, it wasn't just people commenting in support. Local reporters reached out. A national podcast producer called me for an interview. They wanted the story. The granddaughter who inherited land and stood up to a wealthy family's quiet war. I didn't go looking for revenge, but it arrived anyway, wrapped in polite headlines and legal inquiries. One investigative journalist followed up on the documents I had revealed at the memorial and dug deeper. Within 2 weeks, she uncovered more misuse of family funds, specifically Aunt Lillian's funneling of consulting payments from the vineyard's profits to cover a failed startup her son had launched in LA. The story ran with a title that made me laugh out loud when I saw it. Vines, Lies, and Family Ties. Suddenly, my phone wouldn't stop ringing, but now it wasn't hostile. It was apologetic. Cautious. Calculated. Uncle Gregory's attorney sent an email formally withdrawing any prior concerns regarding the vineyard inheritance. Leah deleted half her Instagram posts from the family's Grant Legacy event. And Darren? He tried calling. Twice. I didn't answer. But the biggest surprise came from my father. He showed up one evening at the vineyard, unannounced. I was in the field with Pete, helping him prepare the irrigation system. I looked up and saw Dad standing by the fence, his hands in his coat pockets, watching. "I brought something," he said when I walked over. He held out a small box. Inside was a photo I hadn't seen in years, me and him at a county fair when I was 10, both of us holding cotton candy, laughing at something just out of frame. My cheeks were full, my hair wild. I looked like I belonged to someone. "Your grandma had this in her room until the day she passed," he said. "I found it when I went through her closet. I think, maybe I forgot who we were for a while." I said nothing, just held the photo, emotions tight in my throat. He went on. "I didn't fight for you when I should have. I let them convince me you were better off being left alone. That you were fragile. But you're not. You're stronger than any of us. And you were right about everything." A beat passed. The vineyard was quiet. "Melissa," he added, softer now. "I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't followed by tears or embraces. But it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years, and for that moment, it was enough. From there, things moved fast. The local Growers Association approached me with an offer. They wanted to help me relaunch the vineyard under a new label, one that honored Eleanor's memory. I hesitated. Fame wasn't my goal, but when they said they'd fund the first harvest season and help with distribution, I couldn't say no. Not when it meant protecting what Grandma had built. We named the new label Row 21, a nod to the row Grandma and I had planted together during that last summer. The tagline came naturally. Rooted in resilience, grown in grace. The launch party drew a crowd bigger than I expected. Writers, neighbors, friends, even a few of the vineyard workers Eleanor had employed decades ago came to toast. Maya, my cousin, showed up too. She hugged me tight and whispered, "They're scared of you now." It's honestly inspiring. I laughed. I don't want them scared. I just want them to stop pretending I was never part of this family. She nodded. Well, too late. You're officially the story now. Maybe I was. But more than that, I was the owner. The caretaker. The one who didn't sell out when it got hard. As for Aunt Lillian, she was forced to issue a formal statement to the Historical Society, apologizing for any misrepresentations during the vineyard dispute. Rumor had it she withdrew from 2 boards shortly after. Uncle Gregory retreated quietly. Leah and Darren were too embarrassed to show face publicly, and their entitlement dried up fast once the spotlight turned. Their silence was its own confession. And me? I sat on the porch of the vineyard house one evening with a glass of our first bottled vintage Row 21 Cabernet, deep and boldened. I smiled. I thought of Eleanor. Of her calloused hands, her dry wit, her unshakable clarity. She'd seen something in me I hadn't even seen in myself, and maybe, just maybe, I'd earned it. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to like me. I had the land. I had the truth. And for the first time in years, I had peace. The vineyard felt different now. Not just in the obvious ways: new signs, new label, bottles lining the cellar with my name under the brand, but in the air itself. It felt fuller, steadier, like the land had been waiting for the chaos to settle before it could breathe again. Life began to find its rhythm. I started each day early, before the sun stretched over the rows, walking the gravel paths in silence, just like Eleanor had. I kept her old thermos with mechlinged and polished, but still hers. Coffee tasted better in it, maybe because it carried her energy, maybe because it reminded me that legacy isn't always measured in assets or applause. Sometimes, it's measured in steps taken alone, in the quiet courage to keep going when no one's clapping. Pete stayed on as a consultant. He came in twice a week, and we worked side by side in a rhythm that slowly became sacred. He taught me how to inspect the vines with my eyes, not just equipment. The grapes will tell you what they need if you pay attention, he'd say. Same with people, most of the time. That was something I learned the hard way. But I listen now. Not just to the vines, but to myself. I hired a small team, local, loyal, and passionate. I didn't look for experts from big-name vineyards. I wanted people who saw the value in growth beyond profit. There was Lena, who used to help Eleanor harvest in her teens and now returned with a quiet precision. Raoul, a retired mechanic who maintained the irrigation system and brought me oranges from his wife's garden every Friday. Even Maya, slowly warming back into my orbit, volunteered to help manage events and community outreach. We joked about creating a Grant family healing center in the back barn. Just the non-toxic ones invited, she quipped. The days were busy, but not draining. I worked hard, but I didn't feel invisible. There was something healing about the dirt under my nails, the sunburn on my arms, the way wine aged not with rush but with patience. And slowly, that calm began to seep into other parts of my life. My blog evolved too. Rooted went from a personal journal to a platform where others shared their inheritance stories, their battles for recognition, their journeys toward building something of their own. I published reader letters once a week, curated narratives of heartbreak, healing, and hard-won identity. Some wrote anonymously. Some signed their full names proudly. One woman wrote, "Your fight gave me the courage to demand my name be added back to the deed my brother secretly removed me from." Another man, from a farm in Georgia, shared, "Your story reminded me of my grandfather's words. Don't sell your roots just to buy someone else's approval." The more I shared, the less alone I felt. And I realized something that would have shocked the version of me from a year ago. My story wasn't about revenge or proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about proving myself right. About choosing love over legacy, peace over performative loyalty. One morning, in early spring, I found a letter in the mailbox. No stamp, just tucked inside the door. It was from my father. Melissa. There's not a day that passes where I don't think about the choices I made, about what I prioritized, what I ignored. I know I can't undo the years I let them silence you, or the moments I chose ease over integrity. You deserved better. I hope, someday, you'll let me earn a place beside you again, not as an heir or a patriarch, but as a man trying to rebuild. You've become everything your grandmother believed in. I'm proud of you, even if I don't always know how to say it. If you're ever willing, I'd like to walk the rows with you. Just once. No expectations, just gratitude. Dad. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I sat on the porch and read it twice, then folded it into my journal. That weekend, I texted him. Next Saturday, Zavenam. Wear boots. He showed up. On time. No speeches, no performance. Just us, walking between the vines, talking about harvest schedules, soil health, and, eventually, everything else. We didn't solve years of silence in one morning, but we started something new, something honest. I told him he had a long way to go. He nodded. I'm not asking for the past back, just a place in your now. Forgiveness didn't come like a lightning bolt. It came like dew, small, quiet, settling in slowly, not always visible until the sun rose. Even the vineyard itself seemed to reflect the change. Our first post-launch harvest yielded better numbers than we projected. A boutique wine magazine featured Row 21 as the most meaningful new label of the year. They wrote, "Rooted not just in land but in a deeper kind of legacy, kind earned through resilience." I got a call from the local high school to speak at their career day. Me. The girl they used to call aimless. I walked into that auditorium with a barrel sample in one hand and a copy of Grandma's original deed in the other. I told the students, it's okay not to have it all figured out, but never let anyone convince you that your roots make you less. The deeper they go, the stronger you stand. Afterward, a young girl with frizzy hair and nervous eyes came up to me. I want to be a writer. My mom says it's not practical. I knelt beside her. You can be a writer and a business owner. You can be both. Just start with what you love and build from there. Later that night, I sat on the porch again, watching the sun dip below the hills, a dog-eared copy of Eleanor's Vineyard Journal in my lap. I could almost hear her laugh again, low and steady, full of quiet mischief. I whispered, I hope you see all this. And in the hush that followed, a breeze rustled the vines, soft and warm. The war was over. The vineyard was safe. And I was finally, truly free. Sometimes, late in the evening, I sit out on the back porch of the vineyard house with a cup of tea and let the stillness wrap around me. No cars, no sirens, no tension. Just the soft hum of nature and the faint rustle of vines swaying in the breeze. It's in those quiet moments, far from the courtroom whispers, the family drama, the echoes of being called poor. Like it was a curse, that I reflect on how far I've come, not just in miles or in wins, but in self-worth. I used to think value came from how others saw me. I thought if I just proved myself to them, got the right job, the right degree, said the right things at the right parties, I'd finally be one of them. But all that did was keep me small, dependent on scraps of approval from people who never saw my full story. What I didn't understand back then is that worth isn't assigned. It's owned, quietly, deeply, sometimes in the absence of applause. When Grandma Eleanor handed me the vineyard, she didn't just give me land. She handed me a mirror. She saw something in me that no one else did, because she was looking beneath the surface, beneath the labels of success and failure, beneath the noise. She saw me at my most human. She saw the girl who stayed late to talk, who helped her press violets into envelopes, who asked about soil before asking about money. And in trusting me, she taught me to trust myself. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy. There were days I wanted to walk away from it. I'll sign the buyout, disappear from the family's radar, let the whole mess dissolve into silence. There were days I believed them. Believed I was the unstable one. The failure, the liability. And there were nights I cried so hard I couldn't even taste my tears. But something always pulled me back. Sometimes it was her voice in my head, sometimes it was the earth itself, sometimes it was just the quiet anger of not wanting to be erased. Whatever it was, it anchored me. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, like the black sheep standing in a circle of people who all wear matching masks, then you know what I mean. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, too emotional, too different, you know how hard it is to hold your ground when love is conditional. And if you've ever been given an opportunity that others believed you didn't deserve, you know the pressure to justify your existence. But here's what I've learned. You don't owe anyone a performance of worthiness. You don't have to be palatable or polished to matter. You don't need to be rich to be respected. You just need to know who you are when no one's watching. You need to be able to look at your own reflection and say, I stayed true. I stood tall. I kept going. My family may never fully reconcile with me. That's a truth I've had to accept. Some wounds are slow to close, and some people refuse to see beyond their own pride. I've stopped chasing their approval. I've stopped trying to rewrite their narrative. Let them believe what they need to sleep at night. I sleep just fine. And yet, in the midst of all that, there's been growth. My father and I are learning to speak a new language, one made not of guilt or expectations, but of presence. He comes by on Saturdays now, brings coffee, and asks questions instead of giving advice. Sometimes we talk about grandma. Sometimes we just sit in silence. That, too, is healing. Maya and I are closer than we've ever been. She helps with the vineyard events, and sometimes we stay up late in the tasting room, laughing at how absurd it all became. Remember when Leah said you weren't capable of running a business? She'll joke, sipping a glass of Row 21. She's out here hawking MLM supplements now. And we laugh not out of cruelty, but out of freedom. Out of the knowledge that we made it through. I keep Grandma's last planner in my desk drawer. I open it from time to time, flip through her notes and recipes, her scribbled reminders. Fix fence post by East Gate. Don't forget to call M. That M was me, she remembered. Even when no one else did, she always remembered. The land itself has taught me the most. It's patient. Demanding, yes but forgiving. It responds to care, not speed. To consistency, not perfection. It mirrors life in ways I never saw when I was younger. Vines take time, roots go deep before the fruit appears. Some years are harder than others, but the work is always worth it if you commit. And I've committed. I've rebuilt, rerooted, reimagined what my life could be, not based on their expectations, but on my own. I've opened the land to local artists, hosted workshops, written again with purpose. I've made space for others who felt unseen, unheard, unchosen. Row 21 is more than a wine label now. It's a reminder that what others dismiss can grow into something breathtaking when it's nurtured. That the 21st row, the one Grandma and I planted together in the late afternoon sun, was never just about grapes. It was about belief. About legacy. About saying, you matter. Even when they say you don't. So, if you're reading this, wherever you are, I hope you remember this. You're not too late. You're not too broken. You're not too much. You are enough. And sometimes, when the world calls you poor, unstable, a disappointment, the best response isn't rage or revenge. It's rising. Quietly. Firmly. Until your existence becomes undeniable. They called me poor at that meeting. But I stood up, held my name in ink, and said, I own this. Not just the land, but myself. Fully, finally, freely. And that more than anything is the inheritance I'll never let go of.